This is a mural portraying a sit-in demonstration at a lunch counter located in Jacksonville, Florida, which led to Axe Handle Saturday. At the forefront was former Youth Council NAACP President, Sr. Rodney L. Hurst. He is now an author, historian, and Black civil rights activist.
Even with American history, most of you are taught information that is not correct, that is incomplete, that is dishonest, and that is racist. White textbook authors and historians romanticize American history. And I think we're the only country in the history of existence that we give credit to a person for discovering this country who never set foot in the continental United States. And we give credit to a Paul Revere who did not ride from Lexington to Concord, and a Betsy Ross who did not sew the first flag, and a Benjamin Franklin who did not put a key on a kite and fly it up into the sky for lightning to strike it, thereby discovering electricity. For Francis Scott Key, who wrote the Star-Spangled Banner in a way that deals with how upset he was when a black group of military persons fighting for the British in the War of 1812, who were former slaves called the Colonial Marines, and after they whipped a battalion led by Francis Scott Key, but in the third verse of the Star-Spangled Banner, the racism that dripped from those words about how glad he was to see the Colonial Marines killed during the Battle of Fort McHenry. A national anthem that has everything to do with war and nothing to do with patriotism.
This project would not be necessary if there had always been the inclusion of the contributions of African and African American people, not only to U.S. history, but all history. Likewise, we've systematically neglected the contributions of Asian American people and leaders in our renditions generally of U.S. history. So, I think it's important, though, to say that I think that that's an example of how racism exists within our systems of schooling and of the development of curriculum and textbooks, rather than an individual decision by a teacher who's like, I'm going to make sure that these stories and these perspectives aren't heard.
Out of our history. We get some points that are good, but there are a lot of people that are left out of our history. So we need more in-depth information about Black history. And it's by design, I must say. It's by design.
They played baseball on a sandy field, either behind their schools or in some of the public parks here in Jacksonville. Black schools did not get sufficient money to carry out their mission of education. The difference was Black teachers who made chicken salad without having any chicken. They did some things, remarkable things in my opinion. The person who wrote the Three Musketeers, Alexander Dumas, was Black. That the father of Russian literature, Alexander Pushkin, was Black. That Queen Charlotte, the great-great-great-grandmother of Queen Elizabeth II, the reigning monarch of England, was Black. That Ludwig von Beethoven's father and grandfather were Black. When we don't include those things in American society, when you don't read about them, when they are not in your textbooks, then there's a lack of respect that folk who look like you and who look like some of your classmates did not do anything in American society. And it's criminal. And it's criminal because it cripples all of the students in the classroom, black and white, in understanding this country. In Mr. Pearson's class, when he told us to leave that 8th grade American history book at home, and we started studying American history outside of the textbook approved by the Duval County school system for Negro students in this Negro school as part of the Negro division of the Duval County public school system, then we studied and internalized and learned an inclusive American history, the relevant contributions by blacks and whites in American history, and dispel some of the myths that some of you are still being taught today.
Demonstrated by his teacher in 8th grade, Rutledge Pearson, who refused to teach history in this unbalanced, incomplete, dishonest, and racist way. Really true with young adults. You know, so when we say that most of the social change that's taken place for the better in this country has come from young people your age, that's the truth too. And I think that's one reason why people aren't as honest with you as they should be, because they're afraid of your power.
Areas that white America and white history have excluded. In Jacksonville, with the civil rights movement being led by young people, I led the sit-in demonstrations at age 16, right after I graduated from high school, and the press blacked out all news about it. So you cannot go to the television stations and the Times-Union to do any research about Axe Handle Saturday and the 1960 sit-ins.
His first book, It Was Never About a Hot Dog and a Coke, provides a first-hand account of Axe Handle Saturday from August 1960. Today it is used as a history text because of the media blackouts.
I was running for my life.
Yes, sir.
We did not have any kind of play acting, if you will. We didn't rehearse what we thought would happen when we set in. And understand that from the first day we set in at Woolworth department store lunch counter, we were subjected to, and they closed the lunch counters, we were subjected to the racial epithets by whites who were standing behind us, upset that they could not get to the lunch counter and eat. So we were niggers and jungle bunnies and niggers ain't acting like colored people, and for NAACP and Go Back to Africa. All of the evil and the hatred that you read about, and you may or may not get a chance to internalize it. You may or may not get a chance to see that evilness and that hatred up close and personal. So as we set in at all of the white lunch counters in downtown Jacksonville at that time, some stores had two lunch counters. They had a white lunch counter, then they had a colored or Negro lunch counter, and some stores that did not have lunch counters, you would walk to the end if you were black, even though you were a shopper and spending money in that store, you would walk to the end. You would stand up and order your food. You couldn't sit down and order it. You would order it whenever the white waitress would come over to take your order. You pay for your food, and then you would wait until the food was brought to you. If it was hot food you were ordering, then more than likely when you received your food, it was no longer hot. Or you either did not spend money in that store, or you spent money and you went home, or you spent money and you walked the 5 or 6 blocks to Ashley Street, which was the black business district, predominant black business district, 5 to 6 blocks away from downtown, and stop at a restaurant there. But so it was a building of emotions and conscious fear. And even though we knew something was going to happen that Saturday, that did not stop us from sitting in. That did not stop us from continuing to do what we were doing, and that is fighting racism, what I call the struggle. So there was some fear, but the fear was not insurmountable at that particular time when Mrs. Williams picked me up. I was escaping to safety. I've looked back on that day a number of times, what I can remember of after the axe handle attacks. And I've often asked myself, would I have done anything different? And the answer is no. Even with what I know now, and even though this sounds like I'm begging the issue, but even with what I know now, the thrust of fighting racism was that important that I wouldn't second guess what I did.
18-year-old, and his life since have been one of the most profound, beautiful examples of moral courage I know.
The difficulty in talking about racism and the disrespect afforded and accorded blacks in this country and in Jacksonville. All of you were born in what I call the integration generation. You've never seen signs that say colored and white. You've never seen signs on a bus that said whites sit from front, colored sit from rear. When you have a society like a white American society that's built on racism and disrespect, and that racism and disrespect manifests itself in the educational arena, and there is this game plan not to allow blacks to read about the contributions that folk who look like them have made to American society. All of that is purposeful. In the educational arena, there is this saying that if it's not written down, it did not happen. And I think on purpose, white historians and white textbook authors have excluded contributions by blacks.
Rodney Hurst served on the city council for 8 years, from 1975 to 1983.
Other than the material things like getting buildings built or getting roads paved or reconstructed, I introduced and passed the first acknowledgement of Martin Luther King's birthday as a holiday, not a paid holiday, but as a holiday. I also introduced the Black History Tour that was coordinated by the Alpha Kappa Alpha Incorporated sorority in Jacksonville. I got a chance to talk to young people, and again, based on my background and the road that Mr. Pearson started me on years ago. I got a chance, and I still get a chance to talk to young people who suffer from a lack of knowledge, thank you, and understanding about who they are. So getting a chance to talk to young people about who they are and the fact that there are things that they can do in spite of, I would recognize as some of my accomplishments.
After 8 years on the city council, Mr. Hurst left, citing that legislation wasn't fast enough to increase hiring minorities and women in the local government.
I think I've made a difference in a relative sense, because whenever you bring attention on something that did not have attention, that was ignored or denied, certainly not studied, then the fact that you are having those persons to focus in on that.
When you're pushing for change in organizations like my university and my college, or in our communities, people resist change when it's going to really make a difference and it's going to lead to greater equity, because other people, mostly people who look like me, white folk, have been the beneficiaries of unequal systems and unequal processes, even if we're not aware of it. And so those processes and systems and those inequities, they have dynamics, there's patterns. Rodney has helped me see those patterns in a way that no one else.
I think I've made a difference, but I don't rest on that. There is so much more to deal with in American society, so just bringing attention is okay. It ain't enough. You still have to continue to fight against racism and fight for, in my instance, Black human dignity and respect.
See, the other thing I appreciate about Rodney is that he respects people so much that he's not going to water down the truth. And I think people misunderstand that about Rodney. I think people who aren't used to the hard, plain, honest truth can sometimes be startled by it and offended by it. He refuses, though, to disrespect us by thinking that we can't handle it. So his expectation comes from a place, I think, of deep respect for human beings. And that's exactly the reason why he is plain spoken and honest and speaks from the heart about racism that he's lived through and continues to live through, and that other people, you all do, and that I do. I'm a part of that system too. I think sometimes people don't understand that comes from a place of both respect and deep love for other human beings, that I love and respect you enough that I'm going to be honest. And that's a beautiful thing that few people have learned and express and live. And Rodney Hurst does all of those things.
For more information on Mr. Hurst, he has 3 books out, and you can check them out at your local libraries.
The books are Never Forget Who You Are, It Was Never About a Hot Dog and a Coke, and Unless We Tell It, It Never Gets Told.
So many of you, as the future brain trust of tomorrow, the decision makers of tomorrow, on your way to college, on your way to universities, you cannot allow someone to read something from a book and stand in front of you and teach you as if it is the gospel truth and you accept it as if you don't know any better. And that's where you are right now.